Welcome back to the Dershow. Before we get to the subject at hand, some news about the upcoming election and Justice Department investigations. We know that the Justice Department is considering investigating Elon Musk for offering the opportunity to participate in $1 million a day lottery in exchange for being willing to register and vote for certain referendums. Not no money was offered to vote in a certain way, but the Justice Department is exploring whether or not it violates rules to offer money to people to register. Of course, we want the more people registered, the better. Other vaguely related is that a bunch of British members of the Labour Party are now flying to the United States at their own expense in order to campaign for Kamala Harris. And the issue is whether or not that constitutes a campaign contribution, flying to the United States to work for a candidate. We know it's not the first time that's happened. Bernie Sanders flew to Great Britain to campaign for the anti-Semite who was running for the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. And Donald Trump has been on radio shows supporting conservative candidates. And of course, there are always allegations that the United States interferes with Israeli elections. Obama was known very much to oppose the election of Benjamin Netanyahu. And there are allegations, of course, that the Israelis are trying to get support for Trump. Basically, people from one country should stay out of the electoral politics of the other country, that we don't really need input from Great Britain, and Great Britain doesn't really need input from us. And so I don't approve of applying the criminal law in close cases, as you know, and I don't think any of these cases warrant criminal prosecution. But I just think as a general matter, it's probably much better if politicians from a given country stick to their country and not try to influence the election. I can't imagine any American voter being actually influenced by a British parliamentarian or a British activist from a labor union, but who knows, or from the Labor Party, who knows? But I think the better tact is to keep politics local. I think it was a great American congressman, Tip O'Neill, who said all politics is local, and it should remain local in the sense of American. Of course, in America, all politics is local because every presidential election is not a national election. It's 50 state elections, and those are as local as you can get. And so we're seeing a lot of campaigning being done on a local basis because this election will be determined by 7, 6, 8 states, and there's a lot of focus on those states right now, on the blue wall and on the red wall, and we'll see what happens. Okay, to the topic at hand. Let's start with what we know. We know that somebody, probably from the Biden administration, that's pretty obvious, and I think that's been confirmed, leaked very, very delicate and very important classified information, super classified information, the highest level of classification, involving Americans spying on Israel concerning Israel's plans to go after Iran in retaliation for Iran sending 200 missiles to Israel. Israel has announced that will retaliate. President Biden has said he knows when they will and what they will do and how they will do it, but he's not saying. But somebody in the administration is saying. And the two things that came out, obviously, one, we all knew that American spies on Israel, Israel spies on America. Every country spies on allies, particularly when you're in a tense situation like Israel and the United States are in today. So Israel should expect that it's going to be spied on by the United States and vice versa. But they shouldn't expect that the information obtained by the United States will be made public or sent to Iran. And that maybe explains why Israel has been reluctant to share information with the United States about their plans. When they blew up the pagers, they essentially told the United States as it was happening. The same thing with the killing of Nasrallah. Nasrallah's successor has now been killed as well. But Israel is wise not to specify times and places of sophisticated military and technological actions that require secrecy. And so the real question is who did this? And of course, my colleague Lawrence Tribe, he knows the answer. Of course, it was Donald Trump who did this, which is the most absurd thing I've ever heard, or somebody acting on his behalf. Obviously, and I think it's being acknowledged already that it comes from within the Biden administration. And the question is who? And the real question is, will we find out? The FBI is on it, but the FBI is often on things in less than a fulsome way. An analogy might be to the leak of the Supreme Court decision overruling Roe versus Wade. It's still not been solved. You give me 30 days and subpoena power, and I could immediately figure out who leaked the Supreme Court decision. That was easy because there are only a few handfuls of people who had access to it and who could have leaked it. But they haven't found out. And they haven't found out because they don't want to find out. They don't want to know, or they don't want the public to know. And the same thing may be true here. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that we'll find out. But it's very possible that the FBI will not do what it can do and turn over every rock and figure out who was the leaker. There are a lot of suspects, and if you go online, I don't want to repeat suspicions that are without any confirmation, but online apps and statements by many people have named individuals in the administration, individuals who have had known ties to Iran, ranging from Mali, who's was instrumental in getting the Iran deal enacted during the Obama administration, even to John Kerry. Obviously, John Kerry is not going to go around leaking any information, but these names have been put forward, in addition to obscure names of people who none of us has ever heard of. But if you go online, you'll see some of them have ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Hamas. There are lots of people in this Biden administration who shouldn't be in possession of classified material or have access to classified material. And I think Congress has hearings, and I think they will, probably not until after the election. But Congress should subpoena people and find out what their backgrounds are. How do they got security clearance? How did they ever get access to classified information if they have these known relationships with Iran, with Hamas, with others? Of course, the executive branch of the government is humongous. It's the largest branch. It's bigger than the legislative branch. It's bigger than the judicial branch. The executive branch has thousands and thousands and thousands of people in it. And they're all supposed to be vetted. They don't all have access to classified material, but many of them do have access to classified material. And the question is, should they? And the question is, what should happen to them if they reveal it? Let's just compare it to what happened to Jonathan Pollard. I was one of Jonathan Pollard's lawyers early on in his case. You may remember him. He was a kind of low-ranking naval officer, and he learned that Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense, had refused to provide Israel with information they were supposed to provide them under a memo of understanding. And Pollard basically took the law into his own hand and provided Israel with that information. He got life imprisonment and served over 30 years. And as a result of that, several people were denied security clearance who had nothing to do with the case, just because they were born in Israel, or they had Israeli relatives, or they were deemed to be too close to Israel, and they were denied security clearance. Some of those cases actually made it to court. And the same standard has not been applied to people who have close connections now to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Students for Justice in Palestine, or Students for Injustice regarding Palestine, which is what I prefer to call them, students who have created so much havoc on campus, some of them calling for a death to Jews, some of them calling for victory of Hamas and jihad. And there are apparently people in the Biden administration who have ties to these advocates of not only hate but violence against Israel. And so the question is, who had a motive in the State Department or in the White House or in the Executive House or other branches of government? Who might have had a motive to tip off the Iranians? And it's apparently worked. My understanding, and again, this is not based on any confidential information, is that Israel was intending to attack Iran before this, sooner, and well before the election. But these disclosures may have required Israel to slow down and reconsider. Obviously, it doesn't want to use a plan that Iran has. I've been told by some friends, these smart Israelis, they did this, and it's a false flag. They produce these fake information in order to mislead Iran. No, it's not the case here. This is real. And this really, really hurt Israel and the United States, because the United States is intending to support Israel if Israel listens to its request to respond in a more proportional and moderate way. A mistake in my view, but Israel makes that decision. My view is that Israel ought to use this as an opportunity to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. Whether it can do so without the help of the United States, I just don't know. I'm not a military expert, but I'm told that it could do a lot of damage to Iran's nuclear facilities. It could also do a lot of damage to its oil facilities. The problem with attacking oil facilities, the price of oil will skyrocket just before the election. And I think the United States has made it clear to Israel that we don't want you to influence this election in a way that hurts the incumbent vice president of the United States. And whether Israel has agreed or not, I don't know. In the meeting yesterday between Blinken and Netanyahu, apparently Netanyahu made a very strong statement saying, look, the attempt to assassinate him raised the stakes. We now know that a drone, hit the residence of the prime minister in Caesarea. It didn't hit it squarely in a way that would have killed the people inside had they been there, but it hit the house. Original reports were that it just hit in the gardens, but no, it hit the house, and there's no question the house was targeted. And who knows? The prime minister or members of his family might have been killed had they been there. They weren't there. The Iranian or the Hezbollah intelligence was not nearly as good as Israeli intelligence when they managed to assassinate leaders. And remember, there's a big difference. It's perfectly okay to assassinate a terrorist leader. They're criminals. It's not okay to assassinate the head of state of a country. And in any event, Israel certainly doesn't have to take it. And so they may be shifting their plans. I mean, there are some rumors in the Israeli press today that maybe they're not going after the head of Iran, the real head of the octopus. That would really create an increase in tensions. I think it's more likely they'll go after military targets, important military targets, and military targets that send a message to Iran saying that, Israel can do more and can do worse. So don't count on your air defenses. Israel can get through those air defenses. Of course, Iran is now working more closely with Russia and perhaps with China. There are even some indications that Saudi Arabia is moving closer to Iran. There were some meetings, high-level meetings. So the dynamics change all the time in the Middle East, and Israel has to maintain a very high degree of flexibility and ability to respond to new threats as they emerge. The one thing that's clear is Israel should not do anything that will not be successful. And there's no absolute guarantees of success. Success is always probabilistic. Israel has been quite successful. The last time they were attacked by drones and rockets, they managed to get through all the Iranian defenses and bomb a military facility right next to a nuclear facility, thus sending a message to Iran that if we want to get the military facility, we can do it, and you can't stop us. It's been a while since that, and who knows? Iran might have enhanced its military defenses. We just don't know. And the few things that are very clear is A, Israel must respond, unless they can get an incredible deal. I mean, look, theoretically, this is just theoretical, but if I'm the prime minister of Israel and somebody comes to me and says, look, here's what, if you don't attack Iran, Iran will get Hezbollah and Hamas to make peace with Israel, to release all the hostages, et cetera, and to move Hezbollah beyond the Litani River and to make sure that Hamas doesn't regain its authority over Gaza. Of course, you might accept that deal, but that deal isn't being offered. So I think we can be sure that Israel will attack when. We don't know. There are now, 13 days before the election. Many people have already voted, so the election's in process. You know what I think of early voting. I don't like it unless it's absolutely necessary, but I just don't like it. I think people should wait until they hear all the evidence before they cast their vote, but a lot of people have been voting. And so the question is, will Israel, over the next 12 days or so, mount an attack? And if so, could it affect the election? I don't think it would affect the election. I think most people, the vast majority of people, have made up their mind. I haven't, but everybody else in the world has. All the rational people have, but they don't have relatives and friends calling them every minute, telling them what not to do and what to do, and trying to be able to do what I regard as the principal thing and the right thing, and to withstand all the pressures. But the vast majority of voters have already made up their mind, and there's nothing that's going to change their mind. Here we hear all the stuff about, Trump wanted to have his generals be like Hitler's generals. No, he didn't. Hitler's generals tried to kill Hitler. Remember that? The plots to kill Hitler, which almost succeeded. They were by generals. Some of the generals were not Nazis themselves personally. They were members of the armed forces performing what they regarded as patriotic duties. We're not talking about the people who presided over the concentration camps, the death camps, and the killing squads. We're talking about people who fought in North Africa and who fought in Europe. But that's going out there, and now we're having a contest. The Democrats are saying, Trump will lock us up if we lose the election, and now we have Biden saying, well, he should be locked up, and they're saying, we don't mean locked up literally, we mean locked up electorally. I don't know what that means, locked up electorally. But in any event, it's getting down and dirty. I don't think, as I sit here today, that I would bet widows and orphans money on the outcome of the election. It seems slightly to be trending toward Trump. And we also know that there are probably more voters who will actually vote for Trump while telling pollsters that they won't. And of course, the national polls don't matter. Trump lost fairly substantially in the national count, both in 2016 and 2020, and could win. And if he does win, probably won't win the popular vote. One never knows for sure. But, it's coming down to Pennsylvania and Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Nevada and Arizona and North Carolina and Georgia. And maybe there'll be a couple of surprises. Don't know. Don't know whether we'll know on Tuesday night. Pennsylvania is usually pretty quick in counting, and that will tell us a lot. But, a candidate could conceivably win without winning Pennsylvania. So we'll wait and see. It's an exciting election. It's the closest election probably in many years. I voted in an even closer election, the Kennedy Nixon election of 1960, which people still think may very well have been stolen. We know that there were shenanigans being pulled And we know that there was some doubts about the outcome, and Richard Nixon refused to challenge the election, just like Al Gore refused to challenge the election, which also many people think was stolen. That many more people in Florida actually went to the polls intending to vote for Gore, but because of a variety of circumstances, including the butterfly ballot that I was involved in, their votes weren't counted, or they were counted for Pat Buchanan instead of for Al Gore. So, challenging elections is as American as apple pie, and I hate the idea that people are being prosecuted for challenging the elections or disbarred. And you know what I think of the 65 project coming after me, because I said that the government shouldn't be able to delegate responsibility for a governmental function, vote counting, to a private corporation unless the private corporation is willing to waive any rights of privacy or business secrecy, and is willing to be as open as the government would have to be if it were doing the counting. So, as a result of that, a bar complaint's been filed against me. I'm fighting it. But I hate the fact that people think today that challenging an election is somehow illegal or unconstitutional or un-American. It's not. Elections should be subject to challenge in the courts, not on the streets. And so we don't know. Will this election be challenged? And if so, will the challenges be legitimate? And will the election really be over on November 5th, or will it go well beyond it in the way that the 2000 election went up to December in the courts, and nobody knew who was the president going to be, or the way the 2020 election was, in my view, erroneously contested only in the court of public opinion, in the courts, but every challenge in the courts was lost. Okay, let's turn to some letters. Most of them were about the Penny case, the case of the former Marine. By the way, people wrote me and said, nobody's ever an ex-Marine. You're a Marine till the day you die, and probably you remain a Marine in heaven. So sorry for using the word ex-Marine, former Marine, retired Marine. Okay, so Perry is that, and got a lot of letters, the vast majority of which supported my view that the case should never have been brought. Not all. Some did say that he had gone too far, that for the first 3 minutes he was acting lawfully, but after 3 minutes, when the victim slumped over and was obviously no longer a danger, it became criminal for him to continue to hold his throat. Those are factual disputes which will be resolved at trial. Same thing was true, of course, in the George Floyd case, and that dispute was resolved by the jury against the police officer. And there are racial components, obviously, in all these cases, both of these cases that I mentioned. The victim was African American, and the defendant was white. And we'll see how that plays out. All right, first letter. Penny is innocent. An out-of-control person is dangerous. An attempt to restrain until police or other law enforcement can arrive is prudent. I agree with that up to there. The fact that this poor deranged man died is sad, but I believe all the men who assisted with the restraint were simply wanting to protect other vulnerable passengers in the subway. It's true. And yet a jury might conceivably hold that even though what they did, they intended not to do any harm, their actions were reckless. And if they were reckless, then there is a basis for some kind of a manslaughter prosecution. Again, I think this is too close a case to have been brought, and I don't think it should have been brought at all. But obviously the district attorney disagreed, and some of the writers disagree. My uncle was on the Getz jury. Remember, Getz was the subway vigilante who went on a train with a gun. A bunch of thugs came up to him and with sharpened screwdrivers and threatened him, and he pulled out his gun and shot several of them. And he was acquitted of the charges of shooting and killing, but convicted of possessing an unlawful gun. And the letter writer here says, My uncle was in the Getz jury. He was found guilty for the unregistered gun only. Proper verdict. Okay. That's a consensus, pretty widely shared. This is an interesting one. Why can't the jury ask for the past criminal record of Neely? All evidence is prejudicial, being either good or bad. No, not right. The judge will ask for it if he's convicted and if they're sentencing. But when it comes to deciding whether or not the defendant is guilty, it really focuses on the defendant's state of mind at the time of the act. And at the time of the act, if the defendant didn't know of the danger, then one can see why a judge would keep it out. There are some letters that say, however, let me see if I can find one. The Getz decision was correct. I grew up in New York, rode the subway all the time, including to high school every day. I did the same, by the way. I took 3 trains to high school every single day. I grew up in Borough Park, and I went to high school in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I grew up in New York, okay, including the high school. One develops an awareness of who is a danger. It's necessary to survive. You don't have to know a person's criminal history in order to know you're a danger from a criminal. I mean, maybe. But how many times will people think there's a real danger when there isn't? And there are 2 kinds of dangers. A danger that people will be upset and disturbed by having garbage thrown at them and having been yelled at, and a danger that they will be punched. Now, this guy, it turns out, posed the danger of punching people because he had punched an elderly woman. I love when they say elderly woman. She was 67 years old, 20 years younger than me, but she's an elderly woman. And the jury will probably not know about that. Okay. Never be a good Samaritan. That's what the law wants. Well, being a good Samaritan is risky. As you know, there are some Good Samaritan laws in some states. In the civil context that say if you're a Good Samaritan and you render aid to somebody who is dying or very sick, and that person dies, you can't be held criminally or civilly. You can't be held civilly liable. Those are Good Samaritan laws. It would be absurd for Penny to take the witness stand. There is absolutely nothing to gain with that, and he opens himself up to cross by the prosecution that may throw all kinds of stuff at him. I don't agree with you. It depends on what his background is and how articulate he is and how credible he is. I can easily imagine putting him on the witness stand. Now, I would never make that decision until after the close of the prosecution's case. I would want to know if the prosecution had made its case compellingly, and if it did, I wouldn't put him. If it didn't, I wouldn't put him on. But if it made a compelling case, if it was able to persuade the jury that, the last 3 minutes were totally reckless, there was no basis for fearing danger, I think I would have to put him on and have him explain why in his mind the danger persisted and the danger continued. I would never second guess a lawyer because you have to know your client. First thing I would do is I would talk to the client, obviously. And then if he wanted to take the stand, and if I thought he should take the stand, I would subject him to the most brutal cross-examination that he'd ever gotten and see if he survived it and how he did. And only then would I decide whether or not he should take the stand. Okay. In the Neely case, I wonder if the judge will allow data pertaining to the volume of crimes upon people that have occurred at the time and in and around the New York City subway. Anyone on board must have known the potential dangers and would naturally prepare to react. That's a really interesting question. If I were a defense lawyer, I would certainly try to get that evidence in, try to get and I could get it in through the defendant, or I could get it in through experts. You get it in through the defendant by asking him, were you aware of the rates of crimes? Do you have personal knowledge of any crimes? Have you ever experienced somebody yelling at you and then saw them get up and punch? Or get an expert, a police expert, who would testify as to what a reasonable person on the subway might believe if somebody was screaming and yelling in the way that happened. Just interesting. When this happened, I was walking along the promenade on the East River in New York, having just a nice walk, beautiful day, and suddenly this crazy guy jumped out in front of me and started screaming and yelling at me. and he was a young guy, and he didn't threaten me or anything like that, but it was scary as hell. And I, walked very fast to get away from him. He followed me a little bit of the way, and then he didn't. Um, was I scared? A little bit. I mean, it didn't seem to have any weapons or anything like that. And there were people not very close, but it was a promenade, so there were people around. Subway's much worse. Subways are very, very enclosed. And so I completely understand how somebody like Penny could overreact. And should overreaction be a crime when it takes the life of somebody who shouldn't have died? That's a question that the jury will be asked to answer, but I don't think the jury should have been asked. I don't think this is a sufficiently open and shut case for there to be a criminal prosecution. I think that prosecutorial discretion should have resulted in this case not being brought at all. I know some of you share that view, some of you don't. See you next week when there'll be more news and when we'll be closer and closer and closer to a really important election. See you then.